Good morning, witches, pagans, and light workers, magical beings of all kinds. Welcome back to Witches of the Moon, Season 13, Episode 2. We are talking this week about history of witchcraft by region. And this week I'm going to talk to y'all about one of my pantheons, which is Egyptian magic or Egyptian spirituality. So I'm going to be giving you a little bit of history and discussing a little bit about how that plays into witchcraft, if you will. It's I don't think the Egyptians call it witchcraft, but it just the same. It is magic, and I think you'll find that there is a lot of witchcraft, if you will, in the Egyptian or ancient Egyptian culture. Probably still used widely today. As many of you know, the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, believed in a wide variety of deities and gods, goddesses of in their spiritual and daily lives. They relied on a wide variety of goddesses and gods, and they worshipped these gods and goddesses and incorporated them into their daily lives. As far back as history can record, ancient Egyptians practiced magic, rituals, spells, created amulets, used anointing oils, incense in their daily practice, their daily lives. They also were on the forefront of modern medicine at the time through herbal remedies, and they also incorporated, in using these herbal remedies, they incorporated incantations, oils, anointing oils, and various types of ritual and magic to help enhance the healing processes. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that. If I'm looking down a little, I made some notes because I tend to digress, in case y'all didn't watch my last video. So I will try to refrain from doing that. And I'm also going to try to reduce the amount of ums that I put in my video. I'm still new to this, guys, so bear with me and I appreciate your patience. So let's get into it. In ancient Egypt and in Egyptian myth, magic, or Heka, was one of the focuses used by one of the factors that was used by the creator. What the ancient Egyptians believed was there I go with the sorry. The ancient Egyptians believed that the creator used Heka, or magic, to create the world. This was one of the factors or forces used by the ultimate being to create the world. Through Heka, symbolic actions, or what we would consider sympathetic magic, could be used to have practical effects. So again, ancient Egypt, Heka was very much a part of their daily lives. All deities and people were thought to possess a certain amount of Heka, okay? But there were rules on how and when and why Heka could be used, okay? So the primary practitioners of magic in Pharaonic Egypt were priests. They were seen as the guardians of the secret knowledge given to humanity to ward off what was considered blows of fate. So the most respected users of this magic or this knowledge were the lector priests. Lector priests could read the ancient texts. Much of ancient Egyptian culture, much of ancient Egyptian people were illiterate. They were not able to read, especially these ancient texts, these sacred texts, if you will. But the lector priests had the knowledge to read these ancient books of magic that were kept in the temple and place and palace libraries. These, if you want, these books, these ancient texts would be considered, for me, at least the way I consider it, some of the original grimoires or the original Book of Shadows. They were filled with magic. They were filled with the knowledge of how to use this magic. They had spells, they had rituals, they had incantations. These ancient books were kept in temples and palace libraries, and they were used by these lector priests, who were considered the most respected users of this magic. They weren't the only ones, but they were the most respected, because they were charged with protecting the pharaohs or the kings, and they used this magic to do such. In popular stories, some of the stories of ancient Egypt, these lector priests could even use these incantations, these spells, and these ancient texts to bring wax animals to life. They could roll back the waters of a lake. Does that sound familiar? So again, real lector priests perform magic rituals to protect their kings. They would help to bring the dead back to rebirth. They would rebirth the dead and give them new life. Okay. However, by the first millennium BC, their role kind of changed, and it was taken over by what were considered Heka, which were magicians, basically. Heka being magic and Heka being the magicians. And these magicians were used to ward off plague. Their magic was basically focused around the goddess Sekhmet, and Sekhmet was considered the fearsome goddess. She was a warrior goddess, but she was also a goddess of plague. So as plagues were rampant in Egypt during this particular period in time, the roles of lector priests changed more to the Hekau, and the importance was changed more to Hekau. And these magicians would use their magic, their incantations, their spell work in conjunction with the goddess Sekhmet to ward off plague and disease. So they were healers. The other some of the other magic workers were scorpion charmers. These scorpion charmers were used magic to rid areas of poisonous snakes or venomous insects, that kind of thing. Also, midwives would use magic in birthing and helping to bring the new life, the rebirthed life, into the world. They used magic in their skills. Magic was used in conjunction with medicine or healing in Pharaonic and ancient Egypt. Also, wise women were consulted, what they consider wise women were consulted about which deities might be causing someone trouble and how to gain or regain favor with the deity to release them from these troubles or these problems that they might have been encountering. So again, magic used by wise women, okay, what they consider wise women or magic workers in that aspect. Also, you had your amulet makers, or what were considered protection makers. Amulets were used in ancient and pharaonic Egypt for protection by warriors, by pharaohs, and even by some of the lector priests or the Heku. They would go to these protection makers and seek out amulets to be used in their rituals and in their magic, or to protect them as they perform their magic rituals. These protection makers or amulet makers could be either male or female. Okay. None of the magic was magic was commonplace. It was not something that was, unlike today, looked down on, if you will, or feared. It was expected. It was a daily way of life. It wasn't until foreigners started coming into Egypt regularly that that evil magic was considered to be performed, where they started seeing magic as evil. It wasn't until the Roman period where there became evidence of individuals using, or magicians, heku, using or practicing harmful magic for financial gain. They started using this baneful magic to profit, if you will. So these were some things that in ancient Egypt, again, magic was a daily way of life. It wasn't seen as bad until it started being used for financial gain in a very negative way. Some of the most magical time, or best time to perform magic, was considered dawn, when the god and the goddess meet. That is when they considered it to be, or the most magical time is when the goddess was kissed by the god, or at dawn, when the god, the sun, Ra, broke the horizon and met up with the goddess. That's when it was considered to be the most magical time. Right now we consider, most pagans or most witches consider the witching hour between 3 and 4 a.m. But again, it just depends upon your practice and your spiritual history, I guess, if you will. A lot of times the magician, in performing a major ritual or major magic, a large ceremony, if you will, or major spell work, they might have to abstain. Some of their ritual in preparing for this would involve abstaining from sex, or avoiding certain foods or drink, or even avoiding contact with people altogether who were deemed to be polluted or unpure, okay, such as embalmers or menstruating women. Ideally, the magician would bathe and then dress in new or clean clothes before the spell was conducted, or the ritual was conducted. Also, something of interest, again, going back to, here I go with the uhs again, I'm sorry, I do apologize. Something that ancient Egyptians used that I don't think a lot of witches or pagans, people who do magical work, no, I don't. Some of the things I don't think are well known is that ancient Egyptians used magic wands. The wands could be either metal, a lot of them are made of ivory. Metal wands usually represented the snake goddess of and were considered of great magic, and were carried by some practitioners, or heku. Semicircular ivory wands were probably the most popular that were used in the second millennium BC. These wands often were engraved or carved with different deities, usually warrior deities, and the wands were symbols of authority for the magician. You would see the magician carrying, they were a symbol of authority, and that they were able to summon very powerful and magical beings with these wands. They also would often create a circle of protection with these wands, especially around uh, uh, women giving childbirth, when bringing in a new life. Again, these magicians were responsible for rebirthing the dead into new lives. So the magician would carry these semicircular ivory wands that were decorated with various deities, and they would create a circle using these wands around either nursing women or women being in childbirth. The midwives would use them also. They were allowed to carry these wands and use them to draw a circle of protection. So a circle of protection is being used by different cultures, different magical people to create a circle of protection for millennia, literally millennia. Again, only a small percentage of Egyptians were fully literate, and protective or healing spells were often written on papyrus and were sometimes folded up and worn on the body. They would write these Haiku would write these spells on paper, something that we still do today. You can write your intention on paper and carry it in a locket, which would then become an amulet, or carry it in your pocket or in a gree bag or moja bag, or put it in under a spell jar or in a spell jar. So again, spells and private collections of spells were treasured possessions. Again, books of shadows or grimoires. These were ancient texts, or these were very prized texts that were written by these Haiku or lector priests, even back in the pharaonic time when these lector priests were predominant. They would write down their spell work, they would write down their rituals, they would write down their ceremonies in these ancient texts. Some of these books, there's a couple of books that I currently own, and I'm working on my collection. Excuse me. I'm working on my collection, but two of my favorite books that I find to be incredibly educational and interesting, one of which was the Teachings of Teotep, which is considered the oldest text in history. It's considered the oldest book in the world. And this book I got on Amazon. So it's very thin. It's a really thin book, but it's very interesting. But this is considered to be the oldest book in the world. And then, of course, the other one that is a spell book or a grimoire is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And again, this is a very ancient text and probably considered one of the oldest grimoires or books of shadows in the world. Okay, because it's nothing but spell work, and ritual, which I thought that was extremely interesting. I'm still reading on it, taking it very slow because I want to absorb a lot of that knowledge. But again, these books were treasures. They were considered very valuable and were protected. A spell usually consisted of two parts, the words that were spoken and a description of the actions to be taken. So that's how they put it in these books, much like what we do, or at least what I do in my grimoire. To be effective, all the words, especially secret or magical names of certain deities, had to be pronounced correctly, and not even if a person was literate enough to be able to read the text, If they did not know how to pronounce or inflect the name correctly, the magic may not work. So the words might be spoken to activate the power of an amulet, a figurine, or a potion. Yes, they made potions, brews, again, anointing oils. All of these things were used in ancient Egyptian times. These potions might contain different ingredients such as the blood of a black dog or the milk of a woman who had bore a male child. They also include music and dance and gestures such as stamping their feet or pointing. They used rattles that were sacred and used in a lot of ceremonial work. All of this was used to perform spells. So a lot of what we consider tools and practices in modern witchcraft today, these were used in ancient times and by ancient Egyptians. Not just your and you also see this in Celtic traditions and witchcraft. So it's funny that spanning several thousand miles and several hundreds of years, the same workings have been done for millennia by various groups of people. It's very interesting when you read up on the history of magic, especially in various cultures and regions, the similarities that we have. It's really, really, really interesting. And that's why it's not unusual to connect with certain pantheons. You might think, like, why am I connected to this? How did I come upon this? Well, most likely it was from a previous life, and that magic or that spirituality coming from that region resonates with you, and that's why. Some of the ways that the ancient Egyptians used magic is they used magic to provide a defense system against ills and blows of fate. Again, we kind of talked about that throughout their lives. They would use stamping their feet, shouting, or making loud noises with rattles and drums or tambourines. These were used to drive out negative energy. We do that today. We use drum circles, and we use the Native Americans. Another one of my my practices. I know at first it sounded very odd. My primary practice, even though I'm very eclectic, my primary practice is Egyptian and Native American. And at first I was like, I don't get where I'm coming from with this. It seemed like they were very vastly different. And in reality, in studying up on both practices, I find them to be incredibly similar. And even my sister's practice, being primarily Celtic, again, a lot of similarities, a lot. But again, the ancient Egyptians would use sound to ward off negative energy or evil spirits, if you will. I don't like using the term evil. I use it more baneful, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, they would ward off this negative energy, especially during times when someone was vulnerable, such as someone who's ill, or women who are pregnant or about to give birth. They would do a ceremonial ritual using sound, using drums, tambourines, rattles, stomping their feet, shouting, singing, to ward off any negative energy or to protect someone at risk that they might find need these practices. So let's see, let me make sure I'm staying on track here, that I don't, think I've done pretty good here. Yeah, so again, amulets, oils, potions, sound. Oh, healing. Imhotep was considered one of the first, if not the first, physician. And Imhotep used both herbal remedies, things that were, he would create potions or tonics, tinctures, things like that to use to treat different ailments and diseases at that time, as well as he also looked into and practiced or studied or what's the word, created, if you will, for lack of a better term I'm grasping here. But Imhotep, again, largely considered one of the first, if not the first physician, experimented, there we go, with and looked at and studied ways to do different types of surgeries and things of that nature. But his practice or studies started with medicinal herbs and creating medicine from herbs. But in that, he incorporated a lot of magic. He was one of these haiku that would incorporate magic, spells, incantations, and these sacred names in order to give power to this medicine that he was creating. Magic wasn't so much an alternative to medical treatment as it was a complementary therapy. You see a lot of this in, again, varying pantheons across cultures where incantations or meditative rhythmic sayings are used for healing. Surviving medical magical papyri or papyrus containing spells for the use of doctors is, again, there's in studying these sacred texts, these sacred papyrus papers, documents, they're finding that spells were often written down and used in addition to healing and magic, or in conjunction with healing and magic. Spells were often targeted at supernatural beings that were believed to be the ultimate causes of disease, or could help protect them against disease by calling on certain deities. Again, Sekhmet being one of the major goddesses that were invoked during these rituals and utilized, one of the names utilized by these haiku or heikau to produce their magical remedies. Something else that was often done by heikau, gotta pronounce it correctly, I believe it's heikau. Sounds funny, it's like, hey cow, but it's heikau. Many spells included speeches, again, incantations that either the doctor, the physician would recite, or the patient would recite in order to identify themselves with characters or deities in ancient Egyptian times. We talk about sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic was used largely and often by ancient Egyptians. They would act out a certain myth or become a certain deity in order to be healed, or to create healing. The doctor may have proclaimed that he was Thoth and that he was the god of magical knowledge who healed the wounded eye of Horus, and by acting out this scene, it would ensure the patient would be cured like Horus. So again, ancient Egyptians also used sympathetic magic in their daily practice and in their healing. Trying to think if there's anything else I can tell y'all about ancient Egypt and the spiritual and magical uses. I think that's pretty much it. There's a lot of text out there. Again, interesting readings. Highly recommend if you're interested at all in Egyptian magic. Acquire a copy of the Book of the Dead. It's extremely interesting and packed with a lot of spell work. I also recommend, studying up on the different deities. The different deities had different healing effects. They were different aspects of the Creator, and they often changed throughout. Like Sekhmet later on became, she was a lion goddess, a warrior goddess. Again, she was goddess of plague, but later on, in Lower Egypt, became Bast, who is my deity, and she was a party queen. Bast then became the protector of children, and of course is associated with cats. But she was a protector of family and home and children, and she also was the goddess of dance and wine and party, basically. So there's different things that were used throughout ancient Egypt that can be tied with witchcraft, if you will. Another thing that I thought was interesting is there is the in medicine, what's it called? Give me a moment. I can't think of the name of it. But the symbol for medicine, with the staff with the snake coiled around it, that is actually an ancient Egyptian symbol for medicine. So I found that extremely interesting. It was utilized widely. It's still utilized today. So again, very interesting in how the spirituality and the medicinal magic of ancient Egypt is still utilized. The symbolism is still utilized today. Something else, I guess, let me just touch real quickly on, speaking of the Book of the Dead, of course, the afterlife. Anubis is widely been associated with the afterlife and the weighing of a person's soul, whether or not they can move on into the afterlife. Deep ceremonies such as mummification and how it was done, deeply ritualistic, deeply ceremonial, deeply magical. and very important to be done properly. Otherwise, a person may not pass into the afterlife. Um, a lot of people consider the Ankh, which is called the key of life, the original or first cross. And you can see it looks very much like a cross, but it's also the key of life. It's symbolic of male and female and procreation. It's very, very much, you'll see it throughout Egyptian texts and glyphs, art, that kind of thing. So again, magic was something that was a daily part of Egyptian life, ritual, medicine, you name it. So I hope this has been educational. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I didn't digress too much or drag it out too much, but it's very interesting. There's so much to learn about Egyptian magic and Egyptian life and how it has impacted modern day life and modern day witchcraft. So if you have any questions, please leave a comment. Feel free to ask. If you have any information that I may not know, please share it. I'm always interested to learn, and I look forward to talking with you again next week. Have a great week. Blessed be.